much seminary and university-based theological or religious education is currently profoundly inequitable and unjust in terms of its lack of representation. It is thus ineffectual in its reach or life-giving effect in the lives and upon the life chances of those traditionally marginalised, those who are the least in any given society. Surely faith-based leaders and educators would want to redress that inequity in order to ensure justice prevails within their academic fold. Secondly, transcendent praxis. Societal transformation cannot occur from a position of educational stasis. Now I'm with legendary Brazilian educator Paulo Freire when he insists education itself must be an instrument of transforming action, a political praxis at the service of permanent human liberation. This does not happen only in the consciousness of people, but it presupposes a radical change of structures in which process consciousness itself will be transformed. In the new paradigm, the role of expert must be repositioned. Teachers and students together become inquisitive learners, empowering one another by their ability to produce knowledge and to challenge the knowledge the old paradigm produced and presumed to be utterly sufficient. All existential realities have validity and are to be valued. It is in this way that curriculum deficit can be readily ameliorated in a mutually respectful and collaborative way. Religious leaders and educators need have no fear, only gratitude, because the form of authority the new paradigm promotes draws on a variety of religious traditions in its unequivocal assertions that the greatest among us must become the servant of all. Thirdly, theological education and religious studies requires declericalising and demystifying, encouraging and enabling theological religious education of the laity is not simply by way of a counterpoint to clericalism, but as a pragmatic solution to enabling desperately needed wisdom, insight and critique from maybe up to 90% of the church to enter into academic discourses and thus to properly disrupt so-called theological religious truths over which the global elites have for too long maintained total control. Imagine what a radically different intellectual harmony, empowered and liberated lay voices, women's voices, young people's voices might yet contribute into the religious theological academy. Fourthly, contextualisation. Reinforced by the advent of globalisation and thus increased demand for inclusion and diversity, contextualisation quickly became a fundamental characteristic of contemporary secular education, fundamental to enabling multivalent voices and imaginings. Religious theological education might otherwise have been untouched by contextualisation had it not been for the vigilance and prophetic outrage of liberation theologians. Globally, this contemporary practice of contextualisation within our teaching institutions is significantly uneven. As Whiteman has suggested, the problem is often ethnocentrism and ecclesiastical hegemony. These two human constructs can, however, and must be intentionally deconstructed in order to avert the alternative phenomenon of contextual desolation. This insidious ideological phenomenon has translated itself into attitudes of intolerance and mistrust, of increasing ecclesiological conservatism, confusion, of increased academic elitism, of neoliberal flight from public responsibility. We can do so much better, and the almost foolproof approach is still that of taking the incarnation as the best model for contextualisation. Surely, after bearing first-hand witness to the desperately poignant ongoing struggles for dignified self-determination across the globe, I do not at this point imagine there is anyone among us wanting to resile from the unavoidably serious educational challenges which are implicit in every cry for justice, every yearning for freedom. How does any one of us for a moment remain unaffected by the starkness, the horror, the sheer outrage of what are so rightly described as the global obscenities of our time. The too many poor, a massively eco-damaged planet, monumental levels of political corruption, wanton warmongering, human trafficking, preventable disease, religious bigotry, terrorism, the hateful spectre of white supremacy. What I remain utterly convinced of, and I intuit this is a shared conviction, the status quo of all institutionally based religious and or theological educational institutions ought not remain as it is. I sense real agreement with what Freire insists can only enable a radical change of consciousness. He says, through the existential experience of dying to the current reality and being resurrected on the side of the oppressed, or by being born again with the beings who are not allowed to be. It is true, therefore, that any radically new religious studies, theological educational paradigm will and must undermine existing hierarchies of institutionally legitimated expertise. So they must, because while the majority emphasis of any educational discussion focuses of necessity on students and on their learning needs, I remain adamant that teachers and leaders must never be exempt from responding to any of the extant challenges that are now being so eloquently and urgently laid out by those traditionally denied access to the academy. Over the many years now of my academic leadership experience, I have found the greatest deterrent to, and I use this word advisedly, to radicalising minds and thus behaviour in favour of the least among us, is the steadfast refusal of church leaders, of elite academics, of people with power over others to forsake any of the considerable privileges of either their ecclesial offices or whatever other forms of leadership they may hold. It would seem necessary, therefore, that perhaps the hands, the feet, the hearts and minds of those with religious leadership responsibility are in need of being reconsecrated for the uncommon underside work of making all things here on earth to be as they are in heaven. Remaking all religious teaching institutions as places where faith and scholarship meet to reimagine the work of justice would be a very fine faith-based stance to beginning that work. Otherwise, how can we ever hope to measure or assess the extent to which traditional religious teachings are in alignment with or not the social, cultural, political and economic context of Aotearoa New Zealand? How can we ever hope to discern critical trends within religious communities, growth and development, decline and disaffection, without any of this data? And without any of this data, how can accurate and care-filled responses ever be devised and or implemented? There is, of course, an additional difficulty arising in this country, and it is that the academic study of religion has itself actually recently fallen rapidly into decline. This is especially disturbing when one considers that Aotearoa New Zealand is one of the world's most religiously diverse nations, ranking 19th out of 230 nations identified. 19th out of 230 nations. But this incremental loss of critical religious scholarship inevitably leads to a commensurate decline in the availability of experts able to engage in public debates to do with religious diversity, let alone to do with religious conflicts. This decline is highly problematic for the nation, especially in times of religious crisis, such as occurred after Christchurch. Understanding social cohesion, the parameters for healing, understanding the historical, cultural, philosophical and cultural aspects is imperative to helping faith leaders, teachers and scholars counter ignorance and instead to foster tolerance and understanding. In conclusion then, let me turn to the second of my own somewhat rhetorical questions. Can the peace of Allah ever combat the errors of our ways? Yes, it can. Yes, it ought. Yes, it must. Let me reiterate, however, that I believe the corrective first needed is to our religious theological educational processes such that, for example, the concept of peace itself is infused with far more expansive cultural and spiritual considerations. Similarly, the holy name of Allah might, for example, also begin to be more broadly understood as the standard Arabic word for God. In conclusion, and by channeling the late great Canadian educational philosopher Joe Kincheloy, let me reiterate my theory of education. It is a privileged, indeed a sacred enabling role, which requires relentless passion, a humanitarian vision and a critical posture. Education ought to stir the soul, expand the imagination, impart critical skills, energize the body, secure justice, compassion, empathy and ecological sustainability. Critical educators do more than simply study and transmit subject matter. They examine and critique social structures. They are intimately acquainted with community issues. They are powerfully committed to helping others, especially those on the underside, to live meaningful and dignified lives. Do you think that we, both individually and collectively, have the passion, the vision, and the posture to do this work? Do you think that we, individually and collectively, have the requisite attitude of daring to imagine a completely radically new way of being educators? Have we the courage to act boldly in spite of the costliness of doing so?